Bruce.
Ready to go? Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our statutory public meeting. We have 3 items on the docket tonight. So at this time, if I can have Councillors Clayliff and Begg move the agenda, if I could ask that we move 4.2 and 4.3 ahead of 4.1. So it'll be the agenda as amended, if that's all right, councillors. Okay, any questions on that? All in favor? That's carried. Are there any disclosures of interest with any of the items? Okay. So the first item is item 4.2, public meeting report for proposed zoning bylaw amendment on Borden Avenue road allowance, file D14-04-22. Council, the recommendation is that Development and Legislative Services Report 2022-110 be received for information. If I could have Councillor Wells and Bruno put that on the floor. Mr. Schultz, are you up for this one?
Good evening, members of council, Mayor Steele, members of the public, and anyone tuning in at home. The purpose of this meeting is pursuant to Section 34 of the Planning Act for an application initiated by the City of Port Colborne for the lands known as part of the Borden Avenue Road Allowance, lying between Knoll Street to the west and Steele Street to the east, formerly in the Township of Humberstone, now in the City of Port Colborne, Regional Municipality of Niagara, municipally known as part of the Borden Avenue Road Allowance. The application for zoning bylaw amendment proposes to zone the lands as first density residential, or R1. The parcel currently has no zoning as it is a former road allowance that was recently closed by bylaw 6990/28/22. The zoning is proposed to permit a single detached dwelling on a standalone lot while addressing a reduction in lot frontage. And further, the zoning bylaw amendment is being sought as part of the city's real estate strategy to utilize surplus lands. Notice of this public meeting was administered in accordance with Section 34 of the Planning Act as amended and Ontario Regulations 545/06. And notice of the public meeting was circulated on April 28, 2022 to internal departments and agencies. Notice was also circulated via regular mail to property owners within 120 meters on April 27th. And meeting details have been provided along with the council agenda on the city's website and under current applications. As of the date of this meeting, staff has received the following comments from internal agencies and commenting agencies. From our drainage superintendent, our fire department, and the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority, they all have no objection to the proposed application. The procedure to be followed this evening will be to present Development and Legislative Services Report 2022-110. Hear any comments or questions of clarification from council to planning staff, open the meeting to the public for comments and questions, and announce the requirements under the Planning Act for written notice of adoption and passage of the proposed zoning bylaw amendment. At this time, I would like to present Development and Legislative Services Report 2022-110. You could change the slide, please. Thank you. The areas surrounding the subject lands are predominantly low-density residential lands, as shown on the slide here. You can go to the next slide, please. The city's official plan designates the subject property as urban residential. Land uses in the urban residential designation include residential, neighborhood, commercial, and community facilities and institutional uses. Residential uses such as single detached dwellings are permitted in the urban residential designation, and the official plan designation is not proposed to be changed as a result of this application. Next slide, please. As mentioned, the subject lands currently do not have a specific zone assigned as they were a former road allowance. The zoning bylaw amendment once again proposes to add a special provision of the R1 zone that will permit a single detached dwelling. The intention is to create one lot fronting onto Steele Street and one lot fronting onto Knoll Street. And the special provision is being sought to allow for a reduction in the lot frontage, which will be determined as part of the workings with economic development and the neighboring property owners. At this time, Your Worship, are there any questions of clarification for myself?
Councilors, Councilor Bruno?
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to the planner. David, so it's my understanding that we've had a number of stages in this being a former road allowance. So now it has no zoning, but in order to, and it is also being rezoned at this point as a one-lot designation. So does that put things in line for it to be either split into two lots and negotiations to begin for people who might want to buy it?
Mr. Schultz?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruno, that is correct. The property will be able to be split in the future. It doesn't, the zoning does not preclude the splitting of the lot in the future.
Great, and it opens up that opportunity for sale.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Wells?
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to David. The road allowance, the width of the road allowance, correct me if I'm not wrong, is about 20 meters. And the zoning, R1 zoning, minimum lot frontage is 15 meters. So why do we need to have a special provision or a variance on that?
Mr. Schultz?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Wells. In speaking with the Economic Development Department, there is some nearby encroachments that are currently on the city road allowance, which is part of the reason that this came up. So through that process, the intention is to rectify some of those encroachment issues that are on city property currently. So they will be in private ownership. This is the intention, at least. As a result of that, the lot frontage will be likely less than the 15-meter requirement in the R1 zone, which requires the special provision.
Councilor?
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councilor Demery or Councilor Bodnar, do you have any questions on this one?
I don't.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? Councilor Claylough?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to David. So David, what you're saying is that, so all four of the property owners, two on each side, are both interested in purchasing the pieces that are adjacent to their properties?
Mr. Schultz?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Clayliff. To my understanding, there are 3 properties that currently either use the road allowance to access their property or have structures encroaching onto the city road allowance. So the intention, as I mentioned, with economic development is to work out some sort of agreement with those property owners to figure out what land that they would require to move forward. And those would be through the 3 property owners. So the one on the Knoll Street side would be the northern property, and then the 2 properties that are fronting Steele Street.
So if this all works out, then the lots that will remain will not be large enough to be building lots, so then they would be sold off as well to these people if they wanted to purchase? Or is that all worked into this deal as one piece of it?
It's intertwined, sure, but the encroachments when we, I guess, split up the road allowance and give, for example, or sell a portion to the neighboring property, that would be merged with their property.
Right.
The remaining of that would likely be large enough for a building lot, but it's not large enough to meet the R1 zoning requirements, which is necessitating the special provision for the reduced lot frontage.
And may I ask you, some of these have driveways and looks like right-of-ways off of the street and going into the back. What happens to that? Like, you know, if that's their parking area, they basically almost need to purchase. Is there going to be a road through there? Would we have to put a road into their parking lots?
Those details will still have to be worked out with Public Works and Economic Development, depending on how much land they'll need. But to my understanding, there aren't any agreements in place that allow that to happen right now and allow them to use that property as they have been, which is something that the city is trying to clean up.
So this is just basically step one of getting to the end of all of these issues that surround this property.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilor Baggy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess a hypothetical question, Mr. Schultz. There's a lot of ifs in that. Maybe the neighbor's going to buy property. Maybe they're not going to buy property. And if everything follows through, it doesn't happen. By designating this property R1, will it allow for a total sale of all the property for, say, a 2 or 3 story apartment or condo, or does that have to be rezoned again?
Mr. Schultz?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bagu, the zoning that is proposed in this amendment would only allow a single detached dwelling.
Okay, so if it follows through, it has to be come back to council for another rezoning,
That's correct.
if that's the way it goes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Further questions? Councillor Danch?
Just because Councillor Bruno and myself have been a part of this for a bit, I know on Knoll Street, there's gonna be a problem with that hydro pole. Because if that guy wants accessibility, and moving a pole's not cheap, so I just want to throw that one out there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Beauregard?
Through your worship to David, for the adjacent properties to the subject lands, if the owners are to purchase the land that that they are currently encroaching upon, do they have to have their interior side yard setback comply with current zoning?
Schultz?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we'd have to work out those details, but the answer that I give you right now is yes.
Okay. Any further questions? Nothing online. Mr. Schultz?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Before opening the meeting to the public, I'd like to read the following. If a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the City of Port Colborne before a decision on the proposed zoning bylaw amendment is passed by council, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of the City of Port Colborne Council to the Ontario Land Tribunal. Further, if a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submission to the City of Port Colborne before a decision on the proposed zoning bylaw amendment is passed by council, the person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the Ontario Land Tribunal unless, in the opinion of the tribunal, there are reasonable grounds to do so. To any interested members of the public, if you'd like to receive future notices regarding this application, you can contact myself at david.schultz@portcolborne.ca or by phone at 905-835-2900, extension 202, or you can contact the acting city clerk, Nicole Rubley. Our information, if you go to the next slide, sorry, I should have put that up there. The information is on that slide if for anyone that is interested.
Okay, so we can go to the, well, there is no registered delegates at this time. I don't believe there's anybody of the four people here on this issue.
Okay.
No? Okay.
Okay. One last statement here. If you wish to be notified of the approval of the zoning bylaw amendment, you must make a written request to the clerk. Only those persons and public bodies that give the clerk a written request for the notice of the adoption and passing of a zoning bylaw amendment will be given notice. I'll now pass the floor back to you. The future zoning bylaw amendment application will be brought back to council at a future date.
Great, thank you, Mr. Schultz. Seeing no further questions, it has been duly moved and seconded. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that's carried. Item 4.3, public meeting report for proposed zoning bylaw amendment on Neff Street, file D140222. Recommendation that Planning and Development Services Report 2022-111 be received for information. If I can have Councillors Demery and Bodner move that. Chris, are you taking this one? Okay, Mr. Room?
Good evening, Mayor Steele, councillors, members of the public, and anybody tuning in at home. The purpose of this meeting is, pursuant to Section 34 of the Planning Act, is to consider an application initiated by Grandstone Living, Inc. for the lands known as part of Lot 2 on Plan 762, formerly in the Township of Humberstone, now in the City of Port Colborne, Regional Municipality of Niagara, municipally known as a vacant lot on the north side of Neff Street. The application for a zoning bylaw amendment proposes to change the zoning from fourth density residential to a special provision of the downtown commercial zone that will remove the requirement for a landscape buffer between a parking area and an abutting residential property. Notice of the public meeting was administered in accordance with Section 34 of the Planning Act as amended in Ontario Regulation 545/06. The notice of public meeting was circulated to required agencies and property owners within 120 meters of the lands on April 21st, 2022, and a public meeting sign was also posted on the property no later than April 27th, 2022. Meeting details have been provided along with the council agenda on the city's website and under current applications. As of the date of this meeting, staff has received the following comments from the following agencies, and no comments from the public have been received. From the drainage superintendent, the fire department, and the NPCA, they all have no objection, and the NPCA added that they will not require any fee payments to be submitted for review. The procedure to be followed for this evening will be to present Planning and Legislative Services Report 2022-111, hear any comments from the applicant, receive questions of clarification from council to the applicant or planning staff, open the meeting to the public for comments and questions, and announce the requirements under the Planning Act for written notice of passage for zoning bylaw amendments. At this time, I would like to present Planning and Legislative Services Public Hearing Report 2022-111. Go to the next slide there. Thank you. The location and context. The vacant property is located on the north side of Neff Street at the east limit of the street, and the surrounding land uses are primarily commercial and low to medium density residential. You can go to the next slide there. The City of Port Colborne official plan designates the property as downtown commercial. Land uses in the downtown commercial designation include commercial uses, including retail shops, offices, and restaurants, residential uses, institutional uses, public and community uses, as well as parks. Residential uses are a supported land use in the downtown commercial designation. The land use designation is not proposed to be changed as a result of this application. Sections 2.4.3 and 3.6 of the official plan will be used to assess this application when a recommendation report is brought forward at a future date. These sections provide policies on intensification and infill, as well as the general policies of the downtown commercial designation. The next slide there, please. The subject parcel was recently rezoned as 4th density residential in 2021 for a proposed triplex dwelling. Due to site constraints identified during a reconfiguration of the proposal by the applicant, an additional zoning bylaw amendment is required to change the zoning to downtown commercial. The DC zone does permit apartment uses as well. You can go to the next slide there. This application proposes to change the zoning from R4 to a special provision of the downtown commercial zone. The special provision is being sought for the landscape buffer for a parking lot area abutting a residential property not to apply. The application is being, I already read that part. So at this time I'd like to bring in the applicant for any further clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Room. So we have Mark Valancourt on with us tonight. Mark, do you have any comments to make?
Nope, Chris covered everything pretty well there. We are looking to do a second building similar to the existing building we're completing now at 27F. And the parking buffer setback reduction that we're looking for will allow us to do that.
Okay. Mr. Room?
At this time, Your Worship, are there any questions of clarification for myself or the applicant?
Great, thank you. Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to Chris. I interpret this rezoning as an attempt to evade the R4 requirements. As proposed, will that meet any of the R4 requirements?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Wells. No, as it's proposed right now, it wouldn't meet the R4 requirements. That's why the rezoning is being requested. Initially, they were given approval for a triplex dwelling in the R4 zone, and they've recently gone back to sort of reevaluate their proposal. They wanted to switch it to a 6-unit residence there. Given the configuration of the new dwelling, it wouldn't meet the R4 requirements.
And I mean, it doesn't meet any of the R4 requirements.
I don't know about all of them, but the majority of the ones were not being met.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you, Councillor. Any further questions? Councillor Borger?
Through your worship to Mr. Malencourt. I believe you already answered this, but I missed it. Why is the landscape buffer special provision being included?
Mr. Valancourt?
Yes, the way the property is laid out, and because we have restrictions, setback restrictions to the little spur line next door, our parking lot has to be a little creative, where we have to come in sort of in front of the building and go around to the side. So the parking area is closer to the railway. And if we follow the 3-meter setback, that the downtown commercial, I think all zoning calls for it for parking lots. We don't have enough room to meet the requirements that, to meet the 9 parking space or the 8 parking spaces that we need for this building. So that allows us to push the parking lot a little bit closer to the property line and squeeze in all the necessary spaces.
Will you have a landscape buffer though, at all?
We will have a landscape buffer. Do you guys have the drawing in front of you there?
Yes.
I don't know if it came up through at all. We will have a landscape buffer on the north, east, and west sides. However, on the south side, which is fronting onto Neff Street, we will not have a landscape buffer, but that is a dead-end street, and there is a gravel shoulder there. So we won't be right on the road. We will still be set back from the road. There we go. So if you see as you come through the entrance, just as you come to the right, so towards the east, the parking lot proposal is right on the property line fronting on Neff Street, but it is nowhere near the road. The setback, the property line is quite a ways back already, but we will still have a small buffer on the north, east, and west sides.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Demery or Councillor Bodnar, any questions? Okay, thank you.
No.
Councillors, questions? Seeing none. Mr. Room?
Before opening the meeting to the public, I would like to read the following. If a person or public body does not make oral submission at a public meeting or make written submissions to the City of Port Colborne before a decision on the proposed zoning bylaw amendment is passed by council, a person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of the City of Port Colborne Council to the Ontario Land Tribunal. Further, if a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submission to the City of Port Colborne before a decision on the proposed zoning bylaw amendment is passed by council, the person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the Ontario Land Tribunal unless, in the opinion of the tribunal, there is reasonable grounds to do so. You can go to the next slide there. To any interested members of the public, if you would like to receive future notices regarding this application, please contact myself at chris.room@portcolborne.ca or by phone at 905-835-2900, extension 205, or the city clerk at nicole.rubley@portcolborne.ca, extension 106. So if you wish to be notified of the approval of the zoning bylaw amendment, you must make a written request to the clerk. Only those persons and public bodies that give the clerk a written request for the notice of adoption and passing of the zoning bylaw amendment will be given notice. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment and recommendation report will return to council at a future date, and that concludes my portion of the public meeting, and I will now turn the meeting back over to you, Mayor Steele.
Great, thank you, Mr. Room. So we do have a motion duly moved and seconded. Are there any further questions by councillors? Councillor Clayliff.
Through Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure who I should ask. I just wondered, the size of the apartments are being reduced. Do we know what size they're, you said that they were going from 3 to 6. What size will the apartments be at this point when they're reduced?
Mr. Room?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Clayliff. I don't believe I have an answer to that off the top of my head, unless, Mark, you have access to that.
Mr. Valencourt?
Nothing is finalized, but the proposal that we're working on right now is for 6 one-bedroom units in and around the 700 to 800 square foot range per unit.
I just thought that was the size of them before. So I thought, were they going to be quite a bit smaller than that? I thought when it was 3 units, they were 600 to 700 square feet at that point. I thought there was one that was a bit larger and a couple that were smaller. Do you know that, Mr. Valencourt, or you're pretty sure they're all going to be at least 600, 5 to 6?
Yes, the minimum size that we can build them, I believe, according to the city, is 600 square feet. But we're going to be, again, we're well above that, around the 750 square foot mark per unit. And these units are going to be the same size as the units we were proposing when it was just 3. It's just we're looking for 6 now instead of 3. So
the building itself will be quite a bit larger than what was originally proposed?
That's correct.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Further questions? Okay, seeing none. All in favor? That's carried. Yeah, perfect, thanks. Okay, item 4.1, public meeting report for proposed zoning bylaw amendment at 360 Clowley Street East, file D140122. recommendation is that Development and Legislative Services Report 2022-108 be received for information. If I can have Councilors Danch and Beauregard move that. Mr. Schultz.
You can just give me a second.
Oh, just a second, Dave. That's okay. Bring that to volume 2 on one. Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mayor Steele. Good evening again, everyone, members of council and anyone watching at home. The purpose of this meeting is pursuant to Section 34 of the Planning Act and to consider an application initiated by Joseph M. Tomeno for the lands known as part of Lot 25 on Concession 2 on the north side of Colborne Street East, formerly in the Township of Humberstone, now in the City of Port Colborne, Regional Municipality of Niagara, municipally known as 360 Colborne Street East. The application for zoning bylaw amendment proposes to change the zoning from institutional to a special provision of the 4th density residential zone that is proposed to permit a reduction in parking area, landscape buffers, reduction in aisle width, and reduction in parking requirements. The zoning bylaw amendment is being sought to permit the construction of a 16-unit apartment building on the subject property. Notice of the public meeting was administered in accordance with Section 34 of the Planning Act as amended and Ontario Regulation 545/06. The notice of public meeting was circulated via mail to the required agencies and the property owners within 120 meters of the land on April 27, 2022, and meeting details have been provided along with the council agenda on the city's website and under current applications. As of the date of this meeting, staff has received comments from the following members of the public and commenting agencies. From the commenting agencies, the Drainage Superintendent, the Fire Department, and Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority all have no objection to the application. However, the Fire Department notes that fire safety will be dealt with when a site plan and building permit is submitted in the future if this application is approved. The Niagara region comments that the Phase 1 environmental site assessment submitted with the application has determined that a Phase 2 environmental site assessment is required in order to assess the condition of the site in order for a record of site condition to be filed. Regional staff requires that the recommended Phase 2 environmental site assessment be completed and submitted with the subject zoning bylaw amendment application to demonstrate that the proposed sensitive land use can be safely accommodated on the property. Regional staff is unable to support the approval of the zoning bylaw amendment until the time that the Phase 2 environmental site assessment is completed and submitted to the ministry to obtain a record of site condition. Therefore, the Regional Planning and Development Services staff are unable to support the proposed zoning bylaw amendment application at this time. From Lisa Doddridge from 376 Colborne Street. I will summarize this. I believe Lisa is also here tonight, and the comments have been circulated with the council addendum package, so council does have the full comment that was submitted. From Lisa, she has concerns with the parking overflowing onto the city streets, concerns with winter snow removal and lack of space for snow to be piled, for infrastructure not being able to handle the increased flows created by the apartment building, concerns with traffic as Colborne Street East is already a busy street, and concerns with privacy with overlook onto the neighboring yards. From Steve Sinej from 343 Colborne Street East. Steve has concerns with parking and family zoning multiple vehicles, concerns with snow removal and storage of snow on the site. Infrastructure likely does not have the capacity to support the development. And from Lori Sturman at 370 Colborne Street East, concerns with the building not fitting in with the neighborhood, concerns with the parking lot not being adequate for the number of units, concerns with privacy with the balconies overlooking the neighboring properties, and concerns with not enough green space on the property. The procedure to be followed this evening will be to present Development and Legislative Services Report 2022-108 hear any comments from the applicant, receive questions of clarification from council to the applicant or planning staff, open the meeting to the public for comments and questions, and announce the requirements under the Planning Act for written notice of adoption and passage of the proposed zoning bylaw amendment. At this time, I would like to present Development and Legislative Services Report 2022-108. Slide, please. Thank you. The lands surrounding the property are predominantly residential uses to the east and west, with an institutional use to the north being the St. Joseph Catholic Elementary School, and a mix of residential and commercial uses to the south. Slide, please. The city's official plan designates the subject property as urban residential. Land uses in the urban residential designation include residential, neighborhood commercial, community facilities, and institutional uses. Residential uses such as the proposed apartment building are permitted in the urban residential zone, and the official plan designation is not proposed to be changed as a result of this application. The application will be reviewed against sections 2.4.3 and 3.2.1 of the official plan, which are the intensification sections and the urban residential policies. Those will be reviewed when the recommendation report is brought forward to council at a future meeting. Slide, please. The subject parcel currently is zoned institutional. The institutional zone permits public apartment buildings, community garden, cultural facilities, cemeteries, daycares, accessory dwellings, food vehicles, long-term care facilities, place of assembly / banquet hall, place of worship, public uses, social service facility, and uses, structures, and buildings accessory thereto. And the zoning bylaw amendment proposes to change the zoning of the property from institutional to a special provision of the 4th density residential zone, or the R4 zone. The R4 zone permits detached, semi-detached, triplex, fourplex dwellings, block and street townhouse dwellings, apartment buildings, public apartment buildings, and uses and structures accessory thereto. And the special provision, once again, is being sought to permit a reduction in the parking area landscape buffers, reduction in aisle width, and reduction in parking space requirements. At this time, I would like to invite the applicant to speak to the application.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. Mr. Tomato?
Mr. Mayor and members of council, thank you, David, for that presentation. From a proposal, there's probably not much to add. You've seen the site plan and you've seen the proposal. It's a 3.5-story building with 16 units. We've situated the building to the north of the property from land use compatibility, so it oversees the large schoolyard. We're asking for specifically 2 RM4 special provisions, one being the parking from 1.5 spaces to 1 space per unit, and a reduction from the lot area of 125 square meters to 115 square meters in addition to the RM4 zoning. Now, all I can do now is digest some of the comments I've seen from the residents and have heard tonight. I'll address some of them, and then I think there will just be a good time for me to listen and answer questions from both members of Mr. Mayor and members of council. But regarding traffic, Kalali Street, definitely can, I'm not a traffic engineer, but traffic wasn't an issue during the pre-con meeting with the city and the region, so that was never brought up. So to me, that means that the Kalali Street can handle this additional 16 units from a traffic perspective. Regarding infrastructure, another matter that's usually dealt at pre-con meeting with the city and the region, and there was no infrastructure issues identified, so no further studies were required from the applicant. Regarding green space, each unit has a balcony, which is not all apartments have that, so that is the green space for that each unit. Intensification, affordability, those all play into these type of buildings and how we did the design. And I think the units are designed well and they're fair size, and they each have a balcony. Regarding land use compatibility, we have a number of different uses in this area. To the north, you have the schoolyard. East and west, you have mainly residential uses, and then to the south, you have a mix of commercial and residential uses. So there is a mix of uses in this neighborhood. I don't have much more to add. I definitely can answer questions and listen to the public's presentation.
Great, thank you, Mr. Tomato. Mr. Schultz?
At this time, Your Worship, are there any questions of clarification for myself or the applicant?
Councillor Wells?
Thank you, Mayor. I have three questions primary. First one would be directed through you to Mr. Tomato. Mr. Tomato, on your justification report, in the chart under 6.0 zoning bylaw amendment, you have a proposed minimum rear yard of 41 meters. Is that accurate, or should that not be? Should that be a different number?
Mr. Tomato?
I don't have the report in front of me, but if you pull up the site plan, I'll be able to verify that.
From your site plan, the best I could do, because the clarity on it was 6.1 meters. So there's a discrepancy between those two, the justification report and the site plan. So that's why I'm asking the clarification. Top right-hand corner. You'd have to expand it, because as you can see, that drawing there, you can't really read the dimensions off of it.
Now that is a mistake.
Which is a mistake, the 6.1 or the 4.1?
No, the 4.1.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I think I know what happened there. We had a proposal that was quite different, and I must have not swapped out the numbers.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. The second question for you, sir, is that in that same chart, you identify the minimum floor area for each unit as being somewhere between 50 square meters and 100 square meters. And that site plan does not give a good representation of that. Are the units various sizes?
Mr. Tomato?
This is basically a conceptual, so I was just showing the minimums that we can reach the minimums, but this is a conceptual plan that if the units get smaller, then the footprint will get smaller also. But this is almost like the worst case scenario.
Okay. One last question through you, Mr. Mayor, through to David, if I may. When the calculation is done for the minimum lot area per unit, do they include the balconies, elevators, lobbies, foyers, all those other spaces of the building?
Mr. Schultz?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the minimum lot area per unit calculation is done just by the number of units based on the lot area. So the common areas wouldn't be included in that calculation, but the balconies are considered to be part of the unit.
So the common areas are not proportionalized over the number of units?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Demeray or Councillor Bodnar, do either of you have questions?
I do, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Councillor Demeray.
Thank you. Through you to, I suppose it would be Mr. Tomato. I had the same kind of concerns that Councillor Wells has just described. It's very difficult to pose questions and to even receive something that isn't complete. It's not in a place where it's really understandable. So that's difficult. The numbers didn't add up to me either, and it makes things really difficult. The parking situation is something that I would like you to be able to consider going back up to the 1.5, because I do believe one parking spot per unit is not nearly enough. All that means is when there's a need for more, they're going to go out on the road, and that road just does not have the capability of handling parking. It's got water collection issues. There's a lot of issues along there, and it's not the thing to do. So parking is something that I would like to see given some thought to, and maybe have those numbers changed. And I would like to see drawings that are less conceptual and more exact in the dimensions. It would be a lot easier to see what's really going to happen there. While I do really always support the kind of building that will allow some intensification and obviously access to housing for those who need it, this particular build is tough because it really doesn't fit the neighborhood. So it becomes really very difficult. If you take a look at even the difference between the existing building in height and the building that you're going to put in is quite a distance. So I can see where some of the neighbors are a little bit disturbed by that. That it will change their privacy without a doubt. And that does happen with building and with development, and I do understand that. But I just would like us to give some thought and to understand that if this building is there, it's going to be a difficult fit for the existing neighbors. So I think we should try to accommodate them in every way possible. So let's give some more thought to all of this and look at it again. The other thing I would like to know is what's going to happen with snow removal? I'm looking at the whole site plan, and I just don't see where you're going to go with the snow. You've tightened up the parking quite a lot. Where's that snow going to go that would be in that parking lot? Are you going to have it actually physically removed each time? What's going to happen with that?
Mr. Tomato?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I mean, I don't have an answer right away for that, but those issues are usually dealt with at site plan process and will be dealt with during a detailed site plan.
Okay, thank you. I do understand that too, but I don't know about the other councillors, but I have a hard time approving zoning changes without having a really good, clear understanding of what will happen to a building. So, and you know, it's difficult for me. The other thing I wanted to ask about, we did parking, we talked about snow removal. I did want to ask you to explain the garbage collection that is laid out there. If it's what I think it is, that's a pretty nice system, but possibly you could explain that for the benefit of everybody who's listening.
Mr. Tomato?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, again, that's another matter that's usually dealt with at site plan process. That's the process we're following. The garbage collection is one of those matters that's dealt in great detail at the site plan process. So what is there is not by any means what's going to be, or not necessarily what's going to be used in the long term. Oh, I mean, that's what's proposed. That's what the owner is. We've proposed that be that kind of system, but to finalize that'll be dealt with at the site plan.
Okay, because I really would have major concerns if we were to see garbage collection units at the front of the building, curbside. That would be terrible. It's a terrible statement to make. So that's the sort of thing that I'm very concerned about as well. I would just like to see more information brought forward. This just doesn't do it for me.
I agree with your comments. Just that we haven't initiated that site plan process where those details are usually picked up, but they have to be dealt with.
Okay, thank you very much.
Great.
That's everything I have.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bodder, did you have questions? No? Okay. Councillor Beauregard.
Through your worship to David, one of the residents, I too am concerned with servicing in this particular area. It's an area that hasn't really seen a lot of development, and I'm not sure if our infrastructure too can handle it. And so I'm wondering, and based on what the applicant has stated regarding not being required to provide any study on infrastructure, will there at all be a functional servicing report required at any point in the stage of this development?
Ms. Schultz?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's a great question. Certainly servicing is a concern. However, the servicing doesn't typically come up in the process until the site plan process, much like Mr. Tomeno mentioned with other things. But the servicing is certainly the responsibility of the applicant to ensure is in place. So if the servicing is not adequate when they do review that, they would be responsible for upgrading to whatever standard they require according to their engineer that is on the application. So really it's, I would say it's something that's dealt with typically later in the process, but the developer may have looked into this already to ensure that the services are there prior to bringing this forward to the zoning bylaw amendment stage, but it's not a requirement on the city's end to do so.
Counselor?
Thank you. Through your worship to Mr. Tomeno, have you at all considered servicing and the capacity of our servicing and whether or not this proposal will be able to fit in?
Mr. Tomeno?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, we haven't done a detailed servicing report. The only thing that we've taken the pre-con meeting and not being identified at that time from your engineering team, so we don't see any issues at the moment. But like I said, my previous comments, it definitely have to be dealt with at the site plan process.
Counselor? You all set? Counselor Baggy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Tomeno, you did mention this is a conceptual drawing, but are they 2-bedroom apartments or 1-bedroom apartments?
Mr. Tomeno?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, 2-bedroom apartments.
Okay, thank you. And in your pre-consultant application agreement with the city, you initially requested 20 units, a 20-unit apartment building. So I guess this is the changes that you're talking about from 20 to 16, I imagine. So there's nothing about 20 apartments, right?
Mr. Tomeno?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, again, yes, the original proposal has been reduced from the pre-con meeting.
Okay, thank you. My other concern is I copy Councilor Demaray on a lot of things. 2-bedroom apartments, 1 parking spot per apartment, and the street's going to be full. And I do feel for the neighbors. And I'll leave it at that, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Counselors, any further questions? Okay. Mr. Schultz?
Thank you, Mayor Steele. Before opening the meeting to the public, I would like to read the following. If a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the City of Port Colborne before a decision on the proposed zoning bylaw amendment is passed by council, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of the City of Port Colborne Council to the Ontario Land Tribunal. If a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the City of Port Colborne before a decision on the proposed zoning bylaw amendment is passed by council, the person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the Ontario Land Tribunal unless, in the opinion of the tribunal, there are reasonable grounds to do so. To any interested members of the public, if you're tuning in at home, please feel free to contact myself at david.schultz@portcolborne.ca or by phone at 905-835-2900, extension 202, or the acting city clerk at nicole.rubley@portcolborne.ca. For any members of the public in attendance here, there is a sign-in sheet on that table there if you'd like to put your information. We'll be sure to give you any notices that come up. At this time, Your Worship, I would like to invite any members of the public who wish to speak to the applications to do so at this time.
Great, thank you. We do have 3 registered delegates. We have 2 here and 1 virtual. I'll bring our virtual delegation in first. It's Lisa Doddridge. Welcome, Lisa. And what we ask is you state your full name and address, please.
Lisa Doddridge, 376 Kalali Street East, Port Colborne. Obviously, you have my letter. Those are my concerns with regards to this amendment to the lot. By the drawings, it really does not look like it's going to fit the neighborhood. Yes, we do have some commercial buildings, but they are all basically single story, blend in well with the neighborhood. I mean, I am on the corner, so privacy wouldn't be a major issue for me. But the people on either side, that's going to be a concern for them, I'm sure. We do have issues with traffic as it is. It is a very busy intersection. I can't tell you how many times in a week right now we have screeching tires, horns blaring because people are blowing stop signs, doing 120 down the street where it's a 50 zone, and now you're adding into this townhomes that are supposedly being built on the corner, as well as now possibly an apartment building with additional traffic. So it is going to affect it. Those are basically my major concerns, as well as the infrastructure. We can't handle it here. There's a lot of homes right now that flood when we have storms. Then you add to that 16 units. Can this area hold that and handle that? So yes, those are my concerns for this. So I personally do not recommend the amendments to be done for this.
Great, thank you, Lisa. Any questions from councillors to the delegate? Seeing none? Again, thank you, Lisa. Next are in-person delegations. Roxanne, St. Louis. And again, just state your full name and your address, please.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. My name is Roxanne St. Louis, and I reside at 346 Kalali Street East. I am the house that is the closest to 360. I'm opposed to this rezoning bylaw or this amendment because right now we're in a peaceful and quiet neighborhood. With a building of this structure and this many people and this many units, there will be no more quiet. My bedroom window, which is on the side of my house, is 12.5 feet away from the building, from 360. There will be noise from balconies and windows. There'll be people gathering, there'll be music and parties and loud TVs, and not to mention, and yes, now it's legal, cannabis smoking. So I feel like I really don't want to have to put up with all the noise or the odors. I'm in bed quite early, and I'm an early riser because I go to work. And another issue is there will be constant traffic of cars and motorcycles at all hours of the day and night, which means no more quiet again. Cars and trucks will park in the front of my house, obstructing my view to oncoming traffic as I pull out of my driveway, which is going to create a safety hazard. And also, if a fence is erected on the property line, I have a tree in my back lot, which I wish to remain because it soaks up most of the excess rainwater, and I do not want this tree cut down, damaged, or destroyed. Another concern I have is with a building of this size, it's going to need security lights, of course. Right now, being a hall, there are lights which are located under the eaves of the side of the building. These lights are quite bright, and at night it's like having a 1,000-watt bulb shine into your bedroom window. Should this project be allowed, my main concern is what will happen to my foundation. I'm sure that it will shake the structure, like the ground itself, because we do have flooding, and we are built on rock, on shale. So how are they going to get the foundation of this building going without blasting? My father, when he built the house that I'm in right now, he had more than a dozen guys over from International Nickel where he worked, hand dig the basement. It took them a long time, but they did it. This building, I feel, is going to affect all the services, like I don't know what's going to happen as far as sewage or water pressure or water or drainage of excess water goes. And another major concern of mine is privacy. Of course, there will be no privacy because people will come onto their balconies and you're sitting in your backyard and it's like, oh, hello, neighbor. I'm not opposed to people, but I do like my privacy, yes. And another reason, I was talking to my neighbor, Steve and Laurie, who live on the opposite side of the building right now. And I was speaking to Steve last week, and there was an incident that took place with the owner where he came onto the back parking lot and began cursing and swearing and yelling at the top of his voice. And I witnessed all of this happening. And Steve spoke to me and said that he was actually considering filing a restraining order on this owner. So I'm beginning to wonder, what kind of landlord is this person going to be? You know, my concern is don't allow this owner to become a landlord, because I feel there's going to be nothing but problems. I thank you for your time.
Great, thank you, Roxanne. Questions from council? Councillor Desmarais. Oh, want to step up here? Yeah, thank you. To the delegate, Councillor Desmarais?
Yes.
Actually, sorry, no, it's not to the delegate. It would be to staff asking for the identification of the owner.
Okay, just 1 second. Does any councillors have questions for the delegate? Okay. Oh, sorry, Councillor Bruno.
Thank you to the delegate. When you mentioned the tree and drainage, is that tree on your property or is it on the vacant land beyond yours?
The tree is on my property, sir. Okay. It's right on the property line. So if a fence does have to be erected, they're going to have to go around the tree. I don't want that tree removed because on my back lot, when there's a lot of rain, that tree soaks up a lot of water. Okay. So that's why I want it to stay.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
Good, thank you, Councillor. Further questions? Seeing none? Thank you, Roxanne. Councillor Desmarais.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've made this comment before about Ontario numbered corporations and how it would be very helpful to have the business name they go by, because a number doesn't really, it doesn't do much to identify people. So could we do that and find out who the actual owner is of this property?
Mr. Schultz?
Through the mayor to the clerk. I'll defer to the clerk.
Madam Clerk?
Mr. Tomeno is here representing the owner of the property as his agent.
Thank you, but what I'd like to know is who the actual owner is. Mr. Tomeno, could you give us that information, please?
Mr. Tomeno?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, my understanding is it's Heidi Murphy that's the owner of the numbered company, but I've never seen the articles in the corporation, but she has signing authority.
Okay, then. Thank you. At least we have that. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Councillor. Next we have Steve Parker. Again, state your full name and address, please.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Steve Parker, and I live currently at 346 Killaley Street East. One point that I wanted to make with that tree was that it soaks up a lot of the water. Without that tree there, as it is now, we not only have a sump pump, but we've got 2 backup pumps for that thing, plus another hose. We've been flooded out so many times I've lost count. Without that tree there, you're going to build an apartment complex there with a basement, good luck. Be better off building a boat, because that's what you're going to need or something like that. The main concern that I have is for my health. I've been diabetic for the last 40 years with type 1 extreme brittle. And what that means is that my blood sugar can change from one extreme to the other in a very short space of time. And I've had so many complications due to that. The one that does affect what goes on next door, it deals with sleep apnea and PTSD, and the fact that I generally have to sleep for as long as I possibly can, which most of the time is no more than an hour or so, because I get woken up with an alarm that tells me my blood sugar's gone too low. And if it goes too low without the alarm on, I may never wake up. And that's why I've got PTSD on top of that. If you have a fear of dying just going to sleep, that's pretty substantial. The other thing is that because of the lack of sleep, I have sleep apnea. And it took them about 3 years to figure out what was the cause of that. And well, to make a long story short, it boiled down to the fact that I didn't get to sleep that much, so I was getting more and more tired, and you eventually do fall asleep. But I can't stay asleep for more than an hour or so as it is, which means that I end up being in bed for about 14 hours at least. So I'll probably go home from here and have a nap, and then have something to eat, and have a nap again. I have a nap pretty much the whole day. So yeah, having 32 people in this small, I mean, can you imagine if all of a sudden you had a great big massive building just all of a sudden sprout up 10 feet away from you? Or yeah, there's cause for concern there for sure. I seriously doubt that they would have no impact at all on the whole neighborhood with something that massive. Is just out of the question, I would say. Okay, that's all I've got. Thank you.
Okay, just before you go, questions, Counselor?
Actually, I could have asked it of the last presenter, but now that it's come up again, the drainage, through you to the speaker. Currently, with your rear yard drainage, is the building, the old hall next to you, is that currently, is there any of that water that you know of draining onto your property?
Not that I'm aware of it.
Okay.
It's just that when it floods, the whole area floods.
So that's, I guess what I'm trying to get at is the water that's in your backyard is just coming from your yard.
Well, it's paved right now where their
Correct.
area is, so there would be runoff from that onto our side, yeah. It would add to it.
Okay, great. Well, I guess I just wanted to come back to that, and it may be to our planner, Mr. Tamino. So it's my understanding that on a new application like this with more asphalt, with more building, there's less area to absorb water, but that you would be responsible for getting all that water to a storm sewer. I don't know if that's to Mr. Schultz or Mr. Tamino.
Mr. Schultz?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. That would be dealt with at the site plan stage as well. Any stormwater management that's required to be managed at that time is required to be submitted with the application and to the satisfaction of Public Works.
Very good. So in essence, there can't be any water draining off that lot. Shouldn't be now, but in a new development, that would be engineered to prevent that.
Correct.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Counselor Desmarais?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to add to what Councillor Bruno was just saying, this could be one plus in this development, because right now it's all paved, and that water just runs off everywhere. With the new building, there would at least be some green space, not much, but there would be some strips along the side, so it could help someone.
Okay.
That's all I can add.
Thank you. Any further delegations? Seeing none. Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One last statement here. If you wish to be notified of the approval of the zoning bylaw amendment, you must make a written request to the clerk. Only those persons in public bodies that give the clerk a written request of the notice of passing of a zoning bylaw amendment will be given notice. Once again, as I mentioned, there's a sign-in sheet at the back of the room, or you can contact myself at david.schultz@portcolborne.ca or 905-835-2900, extension 202. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment and recommendation report will return to a future council meeting. This concludes my portion of the public meeting. I will now turn the meeting back to you, Mayor Steele, to close the public portion of the meeting and receive the report for information.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Schultz. So we have a recommendation to receive, duly moved and seconded. Any further questions? Councilor Beauregard.
Through your worship to Mr. Tomeno, in order for this proposal to go through, is it expected that the tree will be removed? Does the tree need to be removed in order for this proposal to occur?
Mr. Tomeno?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm not aware that the tree has to be removed to accommodate this proposal.
Okay, thank
Councilor? Okay. Again, we only are receiving this tonight. The full report will come back, which you can make changes at that time, I suppose. Right, Mr. Schultz? Okay. Seeing no further questions. All in favor? That's carried. Okay. So this ends our public meeting this evening. So at this time I adjourn. Thank you for attending and stay safe.